Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to Real World Use Cases, Transforming Supply Chains, a discussion with Global Blockchain Business Council's initiative, BITA Standards Council, on how BITA is helping to make blockchain and emerging technologies a real solution for supply chains, as well as that roadmap ahead. So as a reminder, if you have any questions throughout this webinar, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A box below. But now I will turn it over to GBBC CEO Sandra Ro to kick off this discussion.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. And Riley, thank you very much for leading us into this exciting webinar. I want to just take a moment and welcome anyone who is not familiar with GBBC. If you are, you might want to go get a cup of coffee or wander for a couple minutes while I do this. But I'd like to actually explain GBBC itself, because in our 7 years since we were founded and launched in Davos, Switzerland, we've actually expanded our remit across a number of different areas. GBBC itself, as a Swiss nonprofit association, is the largest and leading industry association for blockchain technology and digital assets. We have the largest community, which include initiatives. The GBBC Digital Finance Division is our financial services arm. Interwork Alliance focuses on the token taxonomy framework, a number of initiatives related to sustainability and beyond. And then BITA is our Blockchain and Transportation Alliance, which is our newest edition under the GBBC umbrella. For those who know us well, you know that we lead with, next slide, please. We lead with education, advocacy, and partnership. And I just want to make a few things clear here. Since our inception, we have always focused on these 3 pillars, and leading with education and fact-based, data-driven analysis in the most balanced way that we can provide information to our community. Our information has always been open source and open access, as well as multilingual when we are able to do so competently. And we look to continue to do that over the coming years as we work with many of you across the world. From a partnership standpoint, we focus on economic development and opportunities for those all over the world. Obviously, we will be talking about some areas of supply chain today, but we look across many different industry sectors and opportunities for many, not just a few. And related to advocacy, I just want to say that we are not a lobbying group in the US sense, but we do advocate for the world is going digital, and we need to help and figure out how we bring many, many people along on that digital journey. So next slide. And then finally, we represent now more than 500 institutional members across the world. As you can see from the map, we still have some holes, so we need to fill those over time. But we look every year to bring in more and more responsible innovators, change makers that look at the world in very different ways to help our society. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Paul Rapino, our Chief Growth Officer.
All right. Thank you, Sandra and Riley. Thank you for all your work and supporting us on the BITA project, which we're really excited today to introduce you to the leadership team, and then also dig into the details on what we're going to deliver and how we would like to have the community involved. Before I do that, I want to build on one thing Sandra said. Blockchain is more than just kind of what it's been known for in the first couple of years. Crypto, we have made a decision and grown in different verticals, like she said as well. And we have been asked for several years to what's our strategy on supply chain. So we gave that a lot of due diligence and thought, and we then met the BITA Standards Council, which we'll introduce in a little bit. But it just made really good sense for us to work together to coordinate what it would look like on a global scale if we brought the resources and the insights of some of the world's top commercial retailers and transportation companies to look holistically at the problem of supply chain, really define the business case, and then drill into what we can do to improve the inefficiencies. So I have really enjoyed joining this leadership team as part of the BITA Standards Council. We merged with them in July, and the last 2 months, we have taken time to thoughtfully look through the assets we had in terms of insights and data aggregating that we've done, and building an open source plan that will scale globally. So on the leadership team, Bob Hitt with Salesforce cannot make it today, but he's been a big asset. Venetia Johnson at Delta has been a big part of the team as well. And then Greg Brown with UPS. I'm going to introduce you now, and I'd love to hear from you why you're excited about the BITA partnership and what you're focused on and what you want to get out of the BITA relationship with GBBC.
So happy to be here this morning or afternoon. I think blockchain technology is going to be very important for the network of the future as we kind of think about the needs of our customers globally changing and how quickly people want their products and or the need to trace products from origin to destination. I think blockchain is a very important technology to help do that. It's one of many technologies. And I think being part of BITA is important, and also GBBC, because GBBC and BITA working together has a global reach as it relates to blockchain technology, bringing players together to help think about how we can move this technology forward, working together. And then for me, in this program, we've been able to kind of think about some of the things that we need to do in order to really unlock the technology, and certainly happy to be part of this as we think about the roadmap going forward.
Thank you, Greg, and really appreciate the insights you've brought and the hard work you've put into some of the projects we'll talk about this morning or this afternoon. So now I want to introduce Dale Chrystie. Dale has been part of FedEx for a long time, and he's also been driving the initial work that's been done at BITA, and he and I work very closely together almost daily on the merger with GBBC to make sure that we can deliver something that's meaningful and going to make significant or meaningful impact to our members. So Dale, I want to make an introduction of you and have you walk through some of the purpose and mission for why we're doing BITA.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it, and honored to be here. I think a very brief history lesson is helpful here. I led the very first use case of blockchain at FedEx in 2017. Others were involved back in that period of time, and Blockchain and Transport Alliance was actually founded in late 2017, and FedEx and UPS are both founding members. So we both go way back on this thing. And I just want to tackle what may be a question for some, which is you've got essentially two fierce competitors sitting here on the same call, and that's okay. I refer to that as co-opetition, but basically it's not about where we compete, it's about where we can agree. And so where would FedEx, UPS, DHL, and others agree? You're going to hear some of that today, where we can reduce friction across borders. That's paper, that's delays, that's resources, that's many things. There's lots of areas where these kinds of companies can agree, and you're going to see that it's a completely pro-competitive approach, which is for the benefit of all. And so it's something that we've just been doing for a number of years, and we look forward to sharing some of that with you today. So I'll transition into the mission statement. You've actually seen it here now for a moment or two, but I actually want to read it because I'll go through it very quickly. It really speaks very specifically to our focus and also wraps around the word open. So BITA Standards Council is dedicated to providing open source, royalty-free data standards for blockchain and Web3 enabled global commerce, and again, collaborating with other like-minded entities who also believe that open is where this is going and needs to be the platform. We will drive the global effort to map, produce, publish, and adopt those standards. So there's a lot in that little short statement, and I'm sure that this is being recorded, so you'll have access to this or be able to get back to the slides potentially if you want to review it further. So what do we think? Greg mentioned it briefly, but for literally thousands of years, back to many thousands of years BCE, movement has taken place, and during that time there's always been some type of documentation, from clay tablets to papyrus to wood to paper, and to how it's evolved to that point. But we're now at the point where it's still virtually all paper driven. Any movement, especially across a border, involves dozens, maybe hundreds of documents or transactions or things like that. And for the first time, literally in history, these technologies, blockchain and emerging technologies, are allowing us not to focus on a process improvement initiative where this piece of paper can get, we can take these data elements out, or we can do something different from that point of view. We can literally now digitize these processes, whether that is an electronic bill of lading or many, many other documents, certificate of origin, customs invoice, those kinds of things. We can literally digitize those. And once we digitize them, then we can really look at the broad, let's leave it on that for a second. We can go on the broad implications of that, and that would be digitalization. So I don't want to get caught up in the big words from that point of view. Essentially, what we're looking at is a future involving global commerce that is paperless. And we've never had the ability to do that before. And it's not the next step in the process. So it's going to take things like common data languages. It's going to take those kinds of things. And whether it's blockchain or in addition to other emerging technologies, I think we're all kind of agnostic to that. I think we're all just kind of keeping our eyes open from that point of view, but they will all require this digital foundation that we're talking about here with BITA, and BITA gets it to the open standards piece of that. And so paperless is one of the key words moving forward. And we're working on common data language around standards. We want it to be pro-competitive. That means that it works for Greg, it works for us. It works for a bicycle delivery company somewhere in the world. It works for everyone. It has to be open and global, and it has to be scalable. And only then, as I say at the very end of this, will this move at the speed of data, which is a very different speed than what we currently have. So again, we have been working for a period of time. We've kind of redoubled our efforts working with Paul and Sandra and others. And we're kind of at this point working with GSMI, the 4.0, and there's now a supply chain version of that. We're going to see a slide on that in just a second. But basically, through those initial efforts, we're establishing kind of the backbone of movement that gets you to things like bills of lading and certain data elements like country of origin and things. I mean, there could be hundreds of data elements for movement, but there's probably a few dozen that are key that actually apply to almost any movement at all. And so we're starting there. We're also starting to kind of look around and see what's out there. Again, we are not, our intention is not to write standards in all spaces. Our intention is to harmonize, is to focus with others. And so World Customs has standards. They used to be proprietary. Now they're open. Those are now available for all to use. So we're starting to work through those and other standards entities to start lining up these data elements to say, look, where do we already agree? If we already agree, for example, on country of origin, great, let's identify that, let's keep moving on. But there's many, many areas where either there is a different opinion or there is just no consensus or no standard at all. And for this to achieve on the horizon where we think it's going to go, we're going to have that foundational element. So again, we will start working very quickly with like-minded open standards entities to do this. And then based on that, we will also then pivot into reference implementation efforts, reference architecture efforts, where that technology using those open standards can also be put out into the world for use. And likely the first one or two of those are going to be something pretty obvious, point A to point B, maybe across a border, possibly with a sensor. I mean, we think these are foundational technologies, but we would start with something very, very straightforward and work with others. And there may be other people that are out there already with some of these. So again, we're simply trying to harmonize here. We're agnostic on the technology side. We are focused on open, and we know that there are others in the world doing that. We just simply want to bring the whole thing together to the benefit of all. Next slide. So we've been busy since July. There's been a lot going on here. Again, we have a core team established. We're looking on the horizon now beyond the GSMI effort, but GSMI was the first of the efforts that we focused on. worked on a go-to-market plan. Again, this is the kind of the coming out party, if you will, from that point of view, in terms of here's what we've been doing since July. We've worked on communication pieces. We still have on the right-hand side of this, we're still locking down the BITA charter and strategy and some of those things. Again, much of our focus to date has been working with the GSMI team on 4.0 and specifically the supply chain piece of that. So that is going to end up with a document that we think will be very helpful. While Greg and I and others live in the supply chain world, many people don't. And so many weren't really paying much attention to the supply chain until the pandemic, when they couldn't get basic things that they needed and didn't understand it and still don't understand it. So I don't know that we're going to be able to explain that in that document, but we're going to attempt to. We're going to work our way through. Here's what it looks like. Here's the constituents. Here's the literally millions of parties from that point of view. And so that's coming up fairly quickly. And then some early view of some of our standards mapping efforts. What we've discovered, what our next steps are, et cetera, et cetera. And again, obviously, we want additional people, whether that's GBBC members or others, to join us in this work. And shortly, we will start working, once we wrap up the GSMI piece, we will start working on the work group kickoff, hopefully by the middle of next month.
All right, thank you, Dale, for that quick snapshot of what we've done. We're going to go into more detail on that and how you can participate, but we've mentioned GSMI a couple of times, and it's an important part of what GBBC does holistically. And more importantly for this conversation, we wanted to brief you on the supply chain piece, as Dale said. So first of all, GSMI started with a project 4 years ago with the World Economic Forum and GBBC's taken the lead on this now, and this will be our 4th iteration. You can go to the website below or at gbbcouncil.org, and you can get a look at the other areas that we've covered. But it's a deep community view of industry standards, industry issues related to mainly blockchain, but also new Web3 technology. It's grown significantly, as you can see the numbers here on the right. The reason I say that is because in order for these projects to really work, we've got to get a global view, and we've got to get community crowdsourced feedback, and continue to drive on iterating on these projects. So GSMI has been a significant piece of that. While we were doing the initial partnership or membership, the merger with BITA, it became obvious that we needed a foundational piece that is a point of view, so that the community, our members and non-members, have an understanding of where we see supply chain from some of the top industry experts, but more so by putting a stake in the ground of here's what we're talking about. It has enabled us to have really good conversations. And for many of you on the phone, or several of you we've consulted with or talked to and gotten early feedback, it's been really valuable to make sure we're moving in a direction of reality and not just taking something and assuming that it's going to be right. But that's why community insights are really, really important. So what I want to do now is just talk briefly, because we asked Greg and Dale to take their insights and help us guide the supply chain piece of this. So I'm going to go back to Greg and ask you, Greg, what did you want to get out of supply chain that would be meaningful to both UPS and your constituents? And what are you excited about with the supply chain project that we're doing with GSMI?
So for me, coming into blockchain and understanding the technology, its maturity, where it is now, and truly what it's going to take to scale and have overall adoption, is very clear to me that it is not a UPS alone initiative that must take place. It's really, how can we work together, whether it be work with companies like FedEx that kind of think about not exactly how they're doing it versus how we're doing it, but how are we looking at it from an industry standpoint, looking at the technology, what has to happen, look at the things like we're talking about the standards, what's really going to require to have adoption? Because the key thing is UPS can have its own blockchain network, FedEx can have their own blockchain network, but really blockchain and the accompanying smart contracts and things of that nature are only going to be valuable if they're adopted. So the adoption is, I think, very critical to have everybody understand what blockchain will do to the supply chain itself. What does it mean? How do they become part of it? How do we normalize it so they'll use it? I think the reality is our customers will only use the technology if it's not a major hurdle to do that. But it's not just our customers, it's also other suppliers, other people that are involved in the ecosystem as you think about moving a package from origin to destination. So to me, I think that what I want to get out of it is normalization across the industry so that FedEx, UPS, Delta, whoever it may be, can stand their specific needs on top of that infrastructure or those standards in order to enact blockchain across the industry.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And that insight from the real world is significant. Dale, the same with you. Can you talk a little bit about your role on the GSMI supply chain project and how the members and readers will really value from it? You're on mute, Dale.
I think I'm biased. I think Greg is too, because that's our true north, right? That's where we are from that point of view. And Greg and I have kind of split the duties a little bit in terms of co-chairs. He's focusing, I think, more on the real world use cases, and I've been focusing more on the standards. So I think we're coming together to the strengths of both in that sense. I mean, we both go to 220 countries and territories. This is not a US thing. This is not a Georgia thing or a Tennessee thing from that point of view. We go everywhere you can go. And at that level, there is no company, there is no industry, there are no borders. So this technology that we're talking about that has never existed before in thousands of years of trade and movement, all the way back to camels and boats and rivers and things like that, we've never, ever been able to truly look at this at a truly global level. And so while a number of people have spent a number of years now, a dozen or more years, trying to monetize it, trying to kind of treat it like the internet and saying, hey, let's go get rich quick from this, I applaud and I agree with companies like UPS, FedEx, and others that are taking the broader view of this thing, which is, look, global commerce is everywhere. It's not just the big companies. It's going to have to work for everything. And in order to do that, we have to lay this foundational piece. And so the foundational piece is a couple of things. Not only is it standards that get you to a common language, but it's also going to be these reference architecture, reference implementation pieces that will allow those standards to be used to build something that people can work in the open development world, the open dev world, or other examples of that, where they can simply say, I'm just trying to move something from point A to point B. Let me do that. And again, blockchain is not yet fast or scalable or mature. It certainly is not as ruggedized as the databases that big enterprises use. And yet what it does really well. And so where provenance, where authenticity, where pedigree matters, we think it's going to be game changing. And so there's a lot of examples of that. You know, I ordered something online. Did I get the right thing? Was it counterfeit? Was it fraud? Do I know where it came from? There's many, many great examples of that from that point of view, whether that's in pharma or aerospace, aircraft parts, or diamonds, or other areas of the world, maybe that forced labor is an issue. We think blockchain technology and Web3 technologies and these kinds of technologies are going to be critical moving forward. They're going to be transformative in that space. And again, for those to be transformative, these foundational things need to be established.
Dale, thank you. And pause for 1 second. We're getting a lot of questions. If you do have questions, please type them in the chat box, and we will monitor and get as many of those as we can. In the GSMI paper, I like how we simplified kind of the story of Maria, which the readers will see in a couple of weeks. But can you just, you mentioned it briefly, but can you just talk through why we started with something simple like that and how complex it really is, and then break down in your answer where we see the problems today?
Yeah, so supply chains. I always kind of say that most people in global supply chains don't realize they're in global supply chains. It's just a company with some customers, and they sell it and they do some things and all that. But when you pull back at the UPS or FedEx or whatever level, all of this is a huge mesh, right? It comes together. So our challenge for this GSMI supply chain paper became, how do you create something that's so complex and so it's like hurts your head to even think about some of these things? How do you boil it down to some essential element or essential story or scenario? And so we basically just created a lady named Maria, and we simply said, Maria orders a birthday present online. That's the whole story. There it is. Maria orders a birthday present online. And then we very quickly walked through, okay, well, she didn't realize it was coming from overseas. So it's an international shipment. And as it turns out, it was late. She missed the birthday, so she had to buy something local. And now she's faced with the kind of the real world kind of realization that now I've got this product that finally showed up and I don't need it. And now I've got to return it. And now she just got thrown into the deep end of the global supply chain pool, if you will, trying to figure out, how do I fill out a document? Who do I ship it through? Where do I take it? How do I do it? Whatever the case may be, when she was simply trying to buy a birthday present.
Yeah. So on building on that, and we'll lead into kind of where we're at the project, we then took that story and used the research arm. And so real quick, how we did that is engage with several of the community leaders, both members and non-members. It's actually one of the few areas where we engage holistically outside of our membership, because we think it's so valuable to get that insight. And we broke down the ecosystem into areas that are impacting that buying and selling or return scenario. And so we will deliver the paper in a format that'll show kind of the basic problems, but then we got to break down that ecosystem, because if we're going to address the business problems from a data framework, we've got to understand where the data is and what it actually is touching. So we'll do the ecosystem, the key roles, who's actually touching the pieces, the parcels, or whatever the asset is, and then how those players in the industry are using current technology. I think Greg, you led an area on kind of what works and what doesn't. Let's not relive the past, but let's learn from it. And there's a good piece of that in there that has helped guide our discussion. And then in parallel, the leadership team I showed earlier, along with Greg and Dale, we've been driving on. First of all, why are we doing this? What are the benefits? So I'm going to turn this back over to you, Dale, to walk through why we're doing this and what a business user, both small or large, could potentially get out of a scenario that we're seeing using new technology.
Yeah, I think the best way for me to do this at this point is think of a rear view mirror versus a windshield. So every one of us on this call has grown up in a world of paper, as a world of chain of custody or customs documents or whatever the case may be, right? Ports of entry as it comes into a country, things like that. So I want you to forget about that for just a second. I want to just say, a 10-year-old today or a child being born today as an adult, let's jump ahead that time frame, 15 or 20 years, or whatever the case may be. If we can literally envision, how can we do this differently? Not how can we improve these thousands of year old processes or a bill of lading that's been used for hundreds of years? Under what set of circumstances might we be able to literally redefine, reinvent global commerce? It might look like this, which is, once you can digitize everything, once you can get to a common language, once you can say, we've now digitized a bill of lading, we've digitized all these forms, we've digitized the processes, and then we've looked at the processes and said, now that they're digitized, how can we improve those processes? How can we create additional value for those processes? Now you get to an entirely different global supply chain. And that's where we think this is going to go. And we're simply trying to help lead the way from that point of view in making this happen. So again, as I would say it, a 10-year-old today is going to want to know where the coffee came from in the cup of coffee that they're drinking. They're going to want to know if the cotton that they have is sustainable. They're going to want to know other types of things like that, whether that is sustainability discussions, environmental, social governance issues, those kinds of things. That's the world I believe they're going to grow up in. And this technology allows us to create the authenticity of that data. I now know that it is a Paul original and it can be proven, or that we know where it was manufactured, or where the cotton came from, or many, many examples from that point of view. Fraud is a huge issue in the world, especially in certain sectors and geographies. But the speed is another key issue here, which is, it moves today. If Maria orders that package, it moves at its own pace. It might move, inland, in China or in some other country. It's going to have to cross a border, et cetera, et cetera. But if you think of things like U.S. Customs or other customs entities, I'll stick with Paul for a second. If Paul is now a trusted shipper, U.S. Customs knows who Paul is. There's 5,000 transactions or some great number of transactions. We think that in the future, some type of an anonymized link of some type could be provided to U.S. Customs that actually moves ahead of the physical movement of the package. And at that point, U.S. Customs and other examples, Department of Homeland Security, whomever, can actually use the same tools that all of us are using, AI and machine learning and things like that, to analyze and optimize and say, keep Paul's packages moving. Move it, don't stop it at the border, just keep it moving. And that's just an example from that point of view. But once you digitize these processes, and once we create this foundational platform for everyone, not only will individual companies be able to build their own piece of value on top of that, but it simply reduces massive amounts of friction and delays and paper and cost for everyone.
Thanks, Dale. We're getting a lot of questions, and I want to take one, and then Greg, I'm going to hand one over to you in a minute. 2 questions. How can we get involved? I'll give you more detail. We have 2 ways for members to get for engagement. One is a member only. So it is a member, GBBC is a member-driven organization. And our members who are members today can engage and join the working group. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then we make our documentation open. It's all open source, as we said, to the public. That's why GSMI was so important, because it's going to be open source, 25-page paper with a lot of material in it that'll enable us to get that feedback from the community. You can supply or send us feedback via that way. And then we'll be holding additional meetings like this as we move forward on our deliverables. So at the end, we will give you a little more detail on how you can engage, but thank you for asking that. Greg Brown, I'm going to ask you this question because this is, I don't know if you sent this in, but this is for you. When we were in the discussion, we said early on, we said, well, let's not create the past. Let's learn from the past. And Greg, the question comes from John. It says Trade Lens with Maersk and IBM tried implementing blockchain supply chain. It was shut down. Can you talk about some of the lessons and successes from that and failures that we can learn from?
Well, I have to look at my notes specifically on Trade Lens, but when you look at the early applications of blockchain, some of them were public, and in those public blockchain networks, when you think about that, you open yourself up to risk to people that may want to exploit the network. And certainly, as you think about blockchain going forward, whether private or public, really thinking about the security, how it's implemented, and putting in place the right approaches so that you can protect the data. And I think that's going to be the thing we think about going forward, is not the private or the public. I think that's not the discussion here. It's the implementation, how we use it, and really leveraging the network based off the pros and cons, and specifically what you're trying to do. So that's what I can say.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Dale, did you want to add?
Paul, let me jump in if I could. Let me add to that if I can. I think that, if you go back to 2017, 2018, I think a lot of us said, okay, we came out early on and said open is inevitable, et cetera, et cetera. We've got peer-to-peer technology we're really talking about here. And so I think IBM and Maersk really created a business model. And, business models might work and they might not work from that point of view. But if you think that open is inevitable, and then you think that, well, there's companies that, we think everybody needs a blockchain and we're willing to build it for you, or as a service, then you can now look at this model and say, was that the right model? Yes or no. And again, lots of models are successful and lots of models are not. If we look kind of clearly in the rearview mirror, Maersk had a huge footprint, they cast a huge shadow globally. And they were certainly able to bring a number of people onto that. We've just felt all along that it's going to have to work for everyone literally in the world. It can't be a business model. It can't be anything. It just has to be available for people to use. And then once it's out there, we can all build proprietary things on top of it, just like an Android phone as an example, or other examples from that point of view. So I think it was a business model. And in this case, I don't think it worked. Unfortunately, a lot of people would simply jump to a conclusion, which is, oh, here's a blockchain thing that didn't work, therefore blockchain doesn't work. And I don't think any of us on this call think that's a fair assessment. It was a single use case. It worked for a period of time. Ultimately, it didn't. Let's learn from that. Let's all double down and still look at risk and opportunity and various things like that.
Thank you. And building on that, Dale, you want to walk through what our roadmap looks like, and then I'll drill into some of the projects we're looking to take on over the next 6 months or so.
Yeah, actually, this slide, we could probably update it, because as you and I both know, we've done a lot of this stuff, or a lot of this is in process at this point. So again, we think it's important to do an end-to-end view of this. We're starting with a key backbone of key movement. Movement has to happen, point A to point B. What are the basic elements of that? Country of origin and various things like that. We've narrowed down this key movement data elements for the GSMI effort, which will carry on beyond the current GSMI effort. It will be foundational for us as well. We think it's important, again, the taxonomy, kind of the definitions around that, or glossary around that. There's a lot of terms that I might be familiar with, or Greg might be familiar with, that most people are not. They just don't use them on a daily basis. So we think it's helpful to explain some of that, to get to, again, a common language. And we also think that it's important for us to envision and articulate what a framework for a paperless supply chain might be. There's an entity called the Global Express Association, which is a trade association that only has 3 members, UPS, DHL, and FedEx. And we worked together as far back as 2019, creating a call to action to World Customs and World Trade on open systems and blockchain and distributed ledger technology, things like that. Recently, GEA has also created a paperless supply chains call to action and paper from that point of view. And so we're not the first ones to think of a paperless supply chain, but we think that it will be helpful for us to build out a framework for that and make sure that that is part of our true north. We see that as, again, this is not a process improvement initiative. How can I improve that piece of paper? We could reduce it from 24 data elements to 20. That is not the future. That's not where this is going. It is truly digitizing this and creating a common language for that, and envisioning what that global supply chain looks like not if, but when it becomes truly paperless.
Got it. No, thanks, Dale. That's really well said, and looking forward to dig in. Several questions on industry specific. I'm in this vertical, or what, how can I benefit from this? First thing I would ask is, when the paper is out, you do start to engage, read, and send feedback, because those specific use cases are where we're driving, and you can't cover everything in version 1. But the goal is that we're moving in the direction to start solving a lot of the implementation capabilities. I want to talk through, just for a moment, our project focus and how you can get involved. So Sandra mentioned at the beginning how we merged several different initiatives and taken on different challenges within GBBC. And one thing we have learned as a community is, what is the blueprint to bring a standard or a voice of the customer into the marketplace? And I think GBBC is very well respected. It's in many circles from public to private to DC to UK, globally, and in many different industries. So the way we have learned and the way we've done this in a couple of others, I won't go into the details, is let's first of all take the big picture, which we're doing today, and let's define the marketplace that we think it is and where we think we can add value. And then we're going to break it down into 2 working groups. And this won't all happen overnight, but this is the plan, and we'll start building this out shortly. What's the business case? We always start with a business use case. We don't want to chase an idea with good technology, but we do want to start with the business use case. So the first initiative will probably kick off in November. We'll clarify the date here in a little bit, and really start building on what we talked about from the deliverables in GSMI. How do we really do additional research? That's got to be done. And Dale, I'll ask you for that piece of it, because you've done a lot of work on that in a second. Prioritize those focus areas. We will continue to validate the supply chain lifecycle, like I talked about, start to finish. And then again, it's open source. So this is the hard part where we really need help. And many of you have provided that already for us. And that is, hey, so-and-so is doing such and such. How are you different? Well, we don't always know. But one thing we do know is when we have a point of view and a starting point, we can at least map it and say, oh, they're doing this, we're not. Or let's communicate with them and see if we can integrate, a global standard or already an open source standard. And where we don't see opportunity, we'll have to identify those gaps. So this is going to be the first big challenge. So Dale, you want to talk about briefly how you and the team have started to do that?
Yeah, it's not very sexy, I can tell you that. It's a chore. It's obviously a labor of love from that point of view. We see what the future looks like, and we know that we have to get certain things done to get to that future. And so again, early on, part of that was simply identifying what we think the kind of foundational, the backbone of movement is. We all think movement is the right place to start. That's common for Greg and for me and for many others. And so what are those key elements? We've talked about that. Again, if you really look at it, it's hundreds, maybe as many as not quite 1,000 different kinds of elements. We've kind of narrowed it down initially to maybe about 4 dozen or so, maybe around 50. And from that becomes our true north. Now we've started looking out at the standards areas that are available to us. Again, an example of that is GEA. I mentioned that Global Express Association in 2019, we talked about the fact that World Customs had proprietary standards. And over the last several years, GEA has continued to work with World Customs, and World Customs has now opened those standards up for all. So now we can actually go to the World Customs website. They've got them available. We can now get to those. And so when you now start lining up, again, think of a spreadsheet. You've got 50 data elements here, and start adding columns. One column is for World Customs, and then you keep adding for those things. We're literally trying to work through where are the key elements. Do we already have? So for example, country of origin was one that we really felt that we had good consensus on amongst all the standards entities, and it turns out that's correct. World Customs actually points to an ISO standard, and many others point to the exact same ISO standard. So there's no conflict there. That's great. That's a great starting point. Go to the next item, go to the next item, go to the next item. And then you very quickly start realizing, well, somebody has their own standard. Somebody uses a UN standard or an ISO standard or a World Customs or this or that. And so only in that kind of diligent mapping process does it come into focus where you're like, okay, well, there is some consensus. Some things we agree on completely, country of origin. There are some where there's a few standards, but there's no consensus there. And there's some that really don't have any standards out there yet. So that's what we're learning so far. We're through maybe a half a dozen of those for the initial GSMI 4.0 supply chain piece. And that's as far as we've been able to get so far. But again, as you saw on one of the previous slides that shows kind of a Venn diagram, the overlapping point between BITA and GSMI 4.0 supply chain is that 4.0 is the research arm of BITA. So Greg and I are contributing to this to get this up and running, but we will also take the research piece of that from that back to BITA, and that will fuel our efforts, our early efforts as well.
Thank you, Dale. So Greg Brown, on can you talk about the difference between going digital and digitizing, or kind of what's being done today, and what's going to be different about how we look at digital moving forward?
So that's a broad question. Certainly, depending on where you are right now, many people in the future want to leverage new emerging technology, whether it be blockchain or AI or even generative AI, you name it. And it's one thing to take your processes and make them digital. And it's another thing to kind of think about how do you think about how that data will be used in the context of the technology you want to use it in. So I think as you digitize, you really are thinking beyond just making it from paper to data. You're now thinking about how I can leverage it in my ecosystem. In this case, we're talking about really being able to track it for UPS, I guess, tracking packages from one end of from the origin to the destination and doing it with accuracy, understanding where the package came from, the lineage, where it's going, and really thinking about how can we leverage technology like smart contracts to enact processes along the way. That's beyond just converting from paper to digital. It's now saying, I'm going to take the data and I'm going to mix it with technology, and I'm going to enact a process that saves me, reduces my costs, takes people out of the process, and all those things. So I think to digitize goes beyond just the process of making paper digital. It's also enacting in your supply chain and your processes to let the technology work for you.
Yeah, no, I've appreciated that insight I've learned from you in the last several months, because it is a critical piece to why we're building our work groups out. So we'll continue with the business focus, keep that lens on it, continue to get feedback. But then the additional piece we'll add, so on the tech side, so those of you who are tech focused, who understand everything from coding to reference architecture, that's where we'll need additional help, and it might be a task force or a breakout group where we start looking at, if this is the business use case, what are we all aligned on terminology? One of the things that Greg pointed out, or Dale pointed out, over 900 touch points, and if you're going to standardize, you have to have at least a taxonomy. What are things called the same in each country, or where can we get consensus on what they're called, the taxonomy? And then based on that, to Greg's point, how do we digitize that? What does it mean to digitize a process? So that's where our technical teams will come in. IWA, the Interwork Alliance, has done significant work on that, and we're going to lean on our learnings there to then help on the token taxonomy or the tokenization, which we won't go into detail on that, but the idea of taking that data and then putting it in a meaningful framework that can be used by the community to then build out the reference architecture and then ultimately implementation. So the end goal will be several different versions. Getting there is not necessarily a thing we're going to get done by next Tuesday. It's going to be iterative, like any software project or any project is. And the first iteration will be after we define the use case. Out of those 900 items, we've broken it down to about 50. We'll take those 50, make sure there's somewhat of a consensus on what those items are called or what those touch points are called. And then from there, we'll start looking at, well, what does that look like? What would a blueprint look like to meet the business requirements to actually make this work? And we've done, and then the end game, we're hoping in the next, sometime in 2024, we'll have a reference architecture, and some of our members will start coming out with implementation they can talk about in different venues that GBBC is involved in. An example of that, and Dale, you're going to be involved in this in a couple of weeks, is what we're calling Tech for Impact. It's our ability to communicate to different constituents how the blockchain or Web3 technology is actually making an impact and giving an understanding to the community. So Dale, you want to talk a little bit about, where let's scale it up, like tell this story, how are you going to tell this story to a non-technical or a non-business, but more of let's say a political or a regulatory or a different constituency that we also touch, how would you position the story?
Well, I'm not on the technical side, so my focus is on the business and strategy side, so I'm going to approach it from that angle. I also want to tie it back to one of the questions that we haven't gotten to yet, but I'll read it quickly and then give you your answer, which are, what are your expectations for how long it will take for a digitized supply chain? Will this be private sector led only? It will not be private sector led only. It simply won't scale. We can't wait for the government to do it, and the government, and we can't do it without them. And that's where I get to co-opetition. It's not about where we compete, whether that's in the same industry or others. It's about where we can agree. Where we can agree is by reducing this massive amount of friction that Greg's been talking about and I've been talking about. It redefines what we can think of for our children, for people being born today from that point of view. And by the way, U.S. Customs and Department of Homeland Security are pretty far downstream on a lot of these things. Most of you would probably be very surprised at how far along they are. They've got a 21st century framework that's on their website. And they get it. The whole the digitization discussion, they get it. They understand it. They're going to benefit from it, right? They need to know that Paul's a trusted shipper, and they've got technology now, whether that's AI tools or analytics or optimization tools, to help do that. We all win. So we can't wait for that. So part of the discussion, I think, in coming up in a couple of weeks is just that, which is, if we can't wait for you to do it, and you can't just have us do it and define it from that point of view. We have to work together. That's back to that co-opetition. Look to your left, look to your right. Whether you're in a room or virtually on something like this, we are all teammates in this. Yes, we're in business to be in business. We want to, we're going to work on business models that would sit on top of these things, but we can't skip the foundational level here. That's what we have to work together on, and we have to work on it for everybody. It has to benefit everybody. It can't benefit one or two companies or big companies or a certain sector or something like that. So my goal would be to pull blinders back in that meeting to simply say, look to your left, look to your right, look across the aisle, look everywhere, private, public, whatever. It's going to take all of us. One final point I'll make, which is, we've seen co-opetition for, a couple of hundred years. It goes back to the early railroad days, mid 1800s in Europe, where they had to decide what the width of railroad tracks was. This is not a new concept at all. And we've seen it happen in industries where railroad has agreed on car width and length and many things like that, or schedules. And then we got to air and auto industries in the early 1900s from that point of view. But we've only had one global technology to date, and it is the internet. And when the internet came out, a really small number of scientists and engineers came up with the answers that Greg and Paul and I are talking about right now, which is HTTP and TCP/IP and some of those things. They defined it early on, and it simply has worked and scaled from that point of view. In this case, the technology is already out there, and we have to kind of pull back and go, hang on a second, let's all work together to figure this thing out so that we can then accelerate into the future. And so it's not an intuitive look at this. It's not something we've done before, but we certainly believe that that's where this is going.
Thank you, Dale. So with that, Riley has just posted a little poll. If you are interested in joining our work group, whether you're a member or not, please submit your email and we will follow up. So the roadmap, again, we'll get GSMI out here in the next couple of weeks. That'll be public. It'll be made available through our social channels and through GBBC's website. We will make it available and visible, so you'll be able to read that, review it. Not only the supply chain piece, but holistically, it's going to be a really valuable read. And then we will be announcing our first work group, which will be a subset of probably many of you on this call. But between now and then, we'll communicate to you. If you're not a member, we'll get you information on how you could join GBBC. If you are a member, we'll engage on how we can get you to signed up and into one of these into the next work group, and then we'll start drilling into the business side of it and then the technical side. So with that, we're coming to the close. I want to thank you for your time. Dale or Greg, did you have any other comments to close with?
I'll just answer one of the questions real quick because I think it's probably something people are interested in. What information have you identified as proprietary or commercially sensitive, and how are you addressing those concerns while also providing transparency in the supply chain? I can tell you that we don't want your intellectual property. We don't want your margins. We don't want your pricing. We're going to move your packages, and hopefully we do them successfully and to your satisfaction, et cetera, et cetera. This technology will allow you to manage that privacy, will allow me to know what I need to know about the package, and will allow you to share with government agencies like U.S. Customs or others from that point of view. And so, said another way, if you had to share your intellectual property or margins or other information, you simply wouldn't do it, nor would any of us. EU has law out there, GDPR, the right to be forgotten. This technology can scale while still you protecting your private information, your intellectual property, and things like that.
And Greg, you want to give us a closing thought?
Yeah, no, I think this is a very exciting program to be a part of. I really want to encourage anyone that's interested to join, because when you think about blockchain technology, certainly as Dale and others have kind of identified, it's us working together to really scale and push this technology forward so that it's available for all. And to me, I think it's one of many technologies. So blockchain alone is not the answer. It's blockchain plus other technologies, whether it be IoT-centered technology, whatever it may be, coming together for us to rethink our network. But it starts with this education on blockchain and how we can move this forward. And the base of it is the standard. So this is a great program to be a part of. Anyone that's interested, please come and join us. I look forward to continuing the work.
Thank you, Greg. And I want to end by saying thank you for joining. We'll be sending the recording out for this for those who haven't listened or wanted to forward it to any of your colleagues, as well as we do have a BITA website within gbbcouncil.org. You can look at some of the materials we already have public. I want to thank Riley Fay, who has done a lot of the behind-the-scenes work on our marketing communications, our launch, just a lot of the detail work supported there. Greg Baran, our project manager, who's helping us move this forward, and the whole GBBC team that is behind all our initiatives, because we're a small team, but we scale pretty broadly. So, and we can't do it without our members. So thank you so much for joining us. Let us know if you have any feedback, and we will get back to you on some of our deliverables that we discussed today. So thank you and have a good afternoon.